Here's another mixing with mic tip on channel summing versus bus summing. One of the most common questions I get regarding summing is what the hell is it in the first place? And this is something that on the surface seems like a simple thing, but it's very confusing. Back in the early 2000s, what happened was there was this big movement of people who were going to analog summers. And what they were doing is they were taking all of their digital mixes and they were feeding them into analog summing amplifiers that would be 8 channels, 16 channels. Some people would daisy chain them or tie them together for 24 or 48 channels. And what they were finding is that their mixes sounded fuller, richer, and got this more analog sound. So what exactly is summing? Well, the summing of analog components is about really going through components that combine a whole series of electrical signals with their left-right balances using pan pots and level controls and combining them into a single voltage that is a stereo mix, or I guess you could say a left and a right voltage that would become your stereo mix. Now, this basic information is not really duplicated the same way in digital components, because with digital, it's just math. You have this voltage from here, this amount from here, go through each of the channels, balance out or calculate all the panning calculations, and then you come up with a summed formula or output that is exact. But when you get into analog components, when you go through them, you are adding a harmonic distortion characteristic. So all the components of a channel strip and an analog console, including the line or mic input stage, all of the electronics that allow the equalization circuitry and compression circuitry and insert circuitry to work and go through the actual amplification that's used in the fader itself, and the dumping of that into the mix bus all the way up to that stage. That is your channel summing. And so on that level, what you have is a certain distortion characteristic. So with some plugins like the Neve plugin here, or the Waves plugin NLS, they have a drive control, which allows you to overload the channel, and it gives you the distortion characteristic, harmonic distortion characteristic that would bring in. And this is different from the output bus. When you go to the stereo bus electronics, now you're combining all of those signals from all the individual channel strips, and then you're running them into electronic components. In many cases, like the Neve, you're running them through transformers, which add a certain warming characteristic to the sound. So you get a little bit of roll off on the high frequencies. You get a nice, rich low end or low mid frequency warmth that's added in. With the SSL, you get a bit of punchiness. And there's a certain sound that you get by overdriving an SSL console and hitting it really hard at the output stage, which really sounded amazing. And there's something about the way the distortion characteristic that's added in with that console that makes it actually a very pleasing sound. It adds a compression distortion characteristic. And this is what the bus summing plugins are meant to emulate. So now what you have is the ability to do these same things in the digital realm that you would otherwise have to go back through a series of D to A converters and run it through analog summing and then record your result back into your DAW. So now with this process, you're basically avoiding the need to have to go back out into the analog realm and going through all the analog to digital and digital to analog conversion stages one more time in order to get your final mix. So how do you employ them? Well, that's a whole other tip. But basically, you want to employ them the way that I employ them is after all of my processing, and especially on the bus processing at the very end, because you want to be running it through the way that you would in a normal analog console. If you're following that sort of logic, then you want that bus plug-in to be at the very end stage, because that's going to be the last thing that would be going in. And the only thing I would say is that the only other plug-in that you might want to put in if you really want to go to the vintage world is to put an analog tape machine plug-in emulation after the bus output, and then you would have the full circuitry of the actual analog console going all the way through. So a brilliant idea. My tendency is to actually use the processing at the end stage after all my processing to enhance it or add character to it. The way that most manufacturers recommend it is that you put it through the console first, select your console, and then start mixing. Whatever way works for you is great. And so find your formula, go for it and use it, but it's a very powerful way to get that little bit extra oomph out of your mix and get some of that analog warmth and distortion characteristic that we love so much that makes records so easy to listen to. So there you have it. There's a mixing with Mike tip on channel summing versus the bus summing, and you can learn more about all kinds of mixing techniques and ideas from my crazy head at Mixing with Mike. You can join the live classes for free if you sign up for the newsletter. Go to mpginsider.com, sign up for the newsletter. You can then attend the live classes for free every Wednesday night at 7 p.m., and that is U.S. Eastern Time. And from there, if you decide that you want to join in the school, that's up to you. But Mixing with Mike, free every Wednesday at 7 p.m. U.S. Eastern, mpginsider.com.